This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the show, I have Jason Fried. He's the founder and CEO of Basecamp, formerly known as 37 Signals. He's the co-author of Getting Real, Rework, and Remote. I personally love Rework. If you have not read the book Rework, go read the book Rework. I've looked forward to having Jason on for a long time because actually I've known Jason for a long time. Now, not really huge personal but Jason worked with me as a web developer in like 1999 or 2000 before he became world famous, massively successful CEO with Basecamp. So just kind of a cool story for me to watch this guy just go from being a web developer, really good web developer, to this massive success. Awesome story. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, listen, let me give you a little intel on the book Rework. Okay. So I'm in Saigon, and
oh wow,
yeah, there's not many business books that are translated into Vietnamese. And probably 4, 5, 6 authors. You, Malcolm Gladwell. I can't even find Daniel Kahneman's book, but I see Rework everywhere where I see translated U.S. business books in Vietnamese.
That's cool. Yeah, our publisher's really been on top of getting it. I think it's in like 20-something languages now.
Yeah, but it's a real tough one over here for some of the Vietnamese translations, but I thought it was pretty cool. So listen, let me jump in right away because I only got you for a little while. Your first dollar you made online, what year was it? What did you sell? And what did making that first dollar online do to you?
Gosh, I'm trying to remember the year. It was when I was, I think, a senior in high school or something like this. So this was graduated high school in 92. So maybe let's call it early 90s. I don't know exactly the year, but I had made this piece of software called AudioFile, which was a FileMaker Pro based database to keep track of your music collection. I had a bunch of CDs and tapes and stuff at the time, and I was loaning them out to friends, and I wasn't getting them back, and I forgot what I had, and I just needed a way to keep track of the stuff. So I made this thing, and I put it up on AOL. So this was actually before the internet, but it was online still. So dialed in on my modem to AOL, put it up on AOL in the files section somewhere, and included in the README file something saying, if you like this, send me $20. And that summer, one summer, again, I don't remember the exact year, but I got an envelope in the mail. I was still living at home, and it was from Germany. It was one of those airmail envelopes with the blue and red sort of checks at the top of the envelope. And I'm like, I don't know anybody in Germany. And I opened it up, and someone had printed out the README with a $20 bill, US $20 bill, saying, I love your software. And that was the first time I ever made money selling software and selling something online. It was old school, and that someone sent me cash, actually, in the mail, in airmail. But it was amazing because for the first time I realized that I can make something that other people want, and they're happy to pay for it. And I don't even have to know who they are. And I can just put it somewhere and people will find it, and all these different things. And I think that really changed me. And I'm glad I grew up around that time where people were really happy to pay for things that they really liked, because it reminded me that that's how business works. It's not about giving everything away for free and hoping someday, one day, maybe you'll turn the lever or flip the lever and flip the switch and people start paying you. But really, that people are happy to pay for goods and services that they really value.
And what's amazing about that is that I could see some critics, they might say, well, Jason, yes, this is great and all. Well, you're the CEO of Basecamp today, this highly successful business. But here you are, 15, 16 years ago, mapping out almost verbatim the same type of attitude that you mapped out in Rework.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all just simple stuff. It's not, none of the stuff is complicated. It's basic business 101 stuff, which is make something that people are happy to pay for, treat people well, make it good, make it affordable. Like, it's just basic stuff. It's the kind of stuff that every business has to live. if they want to stay in business. And I just don't think you have to get incredibly fancy and complicated with this stuff. Business is a relatively simple concept. It's not easy, but it's fundamentally a simple thing until you make it really complicated. And then it's hard, and then it's extra hard, and then it gets really weird. And then you're making up excuses and you're tracking things that don't matter and all this stuff, when really it's just about, can you make something that's great that people are happy to pay for? And if you can do that and you treat them well and you take care of them, then I think you can build a nice solid business. You don't need, not every business has to be some $1 billion business that has 20,000 employees. You can build a great little small business that takes very good care of you and your employees and your customers. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
But the unique aspect there for you though is taking advantage of this new medium, this internet communication, plus the software skills. So you're right. It's old school business, but you're tapping into two big new things, essentially.
At the time, I didn't know what I was tapping into. I was just making something that I needed and putting a price on it and putting it out there and saying, if anyone else out there in the world needs this too, hey, I put some work into this, pay me $20 for it. And that's all it was. And really that's all it still is today, which is that at Basecamp, we make Basecamp, and Basecamp's a tool that we use every day. And we're basically saying, we make this thing that we use every day. And if any other business out there needs something like this, pay us for it. We'll take care of you. You take care of us. We'll keep making this thing better as we have for the past 10 years. And, let's do business. And it's the same theory as I've always had. And I just believe in it.
And you're trying to make something more valuable than the dollars that people give you.
I think that's what you have to do. Because I think exchanging money is a really intimate thing, actually. And I don't think people think about this enough. After family and friends and love and these things, giving someone $1 is a big deal, because it's basically, someone had to work for that $1. They had to put in their time. They had to sacrifice their own things to have this $1 that then they're giving to you in exchange for something you're giving back to them. It's a really intimate exchange, really. I take that seriously. When we ask people for money, I know this isn't just free. No one has free money. They had to work for this money. They had to get this money. They're making a sacrifice. They're not spending this money on something else. I have to make sure that what I'm giving them is more valuable than what they're giving me. I just really feel like it's critical. I mean, for a short period of time, you can survive cheating people. Certainly you can do that. Lots of businesses out there do that. But that's if you're only interested in being around for a few years or a few months. If you're interested in being around for a long time, which I am, you have to treat people well. And I think one of the best ways to do it is to give them more than they're giving you. And that's sort of how we do it.
And I think what's interesting too is that for the audience out there, they should recognize that you're not talking about raising capital from someone else. You're not talking about an exit strategy. And I relate highly to what you're saying, because I started catering to clients in '96 online. So while we were all kind of growing up in the .com bubble, hearing these stories that, you must raise money from some unknown mythical third party, and then you just get staff and you outfit an office and all this other stuff. It used to make no sense to me because nobody was making money. And I kept thinking to myself, well, I'm actually making money. Wasn't that the goal of the whole process?
Well, what's funny is we do raise money from our customers. That's how we raise money.
Yeah.
And that's you have to raise money from somewhere, because other people need money from you. You got to pay the bills. You got to have payroll. So where do you raise it from? We've chosen to raise it from our customers by selling them something. Other companies will choose to raise it from investors. Other companies will choose to raise it from banks or whatever they have to do. We just do the simple thing, which is we try and make something. People pay us for it, and that's where we get our money from. And I just think it's just such a more direct point of view, and it's more sustainable long term. It's all the things that I think really matter. Again, I have to stress, if you want to be in business for a long time, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't want to be in business for a long time. They want to be in business for a short time, try and sell their business so they can start another business, and then flip that and start another business. And that's entirely a fine model if that's what you're into, but it's not what I'm into. I'm into building something for the long term, because those are the things that I really admire. I admire businesses that have been around for a long period of time. I admire buildings that have been up for 150, 200, 300 years. I admire old oak trees that are 400 years old. That's the kind of stuff I love. I'm a lot less interested in stuff that's thrown up really quickly that's going to fall apart in 10 years. Like, that just doesn't interest me. So I don't want to build a business like that. I want to build a lasting business.
I've got about 5 or 6 kind of key points that I've pulled from your life and your writings that I just love. And I think one of the things that just strikes me, and I'm not necessarily great at it, but do less than your competitors to beat them.
Yeah. This is something that is counterintuitive, especially in our industry, which is tech and software, where everyone's trying to do everything, do more and more and more. My general feeling is that most people don't need a lot of stuff when it comes to software. Like, people have relatively simple problems that they need help with. And software is really good at helping people with that kind of stuff. And you don't need to make things incredibly complicated, and things don't need to do 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 different things. They need to do a few things really well, because that's really what people need fundamentally. Now, everyone might need different versions of those things, and that's why there are lots of different products that do very similar things but do them in different ways. But we've always chosen just to do a few things really well and try and get those things right and nail that stuff and make it really clear and really accessible, so just about anybody can figure out how to use Basecamp, compared to a lot of other tools where they might in the end do a lot more than Basecamp, but people won't even get to that point because they're too complicated and too complex. So I think you can underdo the competition, and when you look out there at the world, you don't have to feel like you have to outdo everybody. You can underdo, especially when everyone else is trying to do so many things.
This is not necessarily a new thought from you. It's a great thought, but it's not necessarily new from you. I'm curious, do you still have people that will come to you with the suggestions of how you should change and how you should augment your product to how they see it and some new nuance and whatnot? Does that still happen?
Oh yeah, it happens all the time, and it's fine, and I expect it to happen. I mean, everyone has their point of view and their opinion and their suggestions, and in many cases, we listen to all of them. In some cases, we do some of them because they make sense, and they're things we hadn't thought of, or they're points of views that we hadn't entertained before, or there's a scenario that we hadn't considered. We absolutely listen to all those things, but it's our job as the people who make the product to sort of build something on behalf of the entire customer base rather than build things for individual customers. Because when you start building things for individual customers and you start adding those things to products, if 1,000 people have 1,000 different points of view, you end up with a really muddled, complicated, confusing product. And we have to maintain the overall point of view for the majority, which is that people come to Basecamp because they want a simple tool that works. They've tried many things that have made many promises that don't work. They're too complicated, too complex. They couldn't get other people to use it with them. And so they come to Basecamp because they've heard that Basecamp just simply works. Yeah, it doesn't do everything. It doesn't do all the things that everything else does. But it does the few things that they need. It does it really well. And, while we listen to all the suggestions, and some of them do make it into the product, we have to keep in mind why people fundamentally come to us, which is that they need something that's really simple, that's concise, that's clear, that works.
Talk about building an audience, because I think even before you became really well known for Basecamp and prior incarnations of 37 Signals, I remember the old 37 Signals manifesto and those points and that simple one page of HTML, which I think can still be found out there somewhere.
Yeah, it's 37signals.com/manifesto.
But that, I'm assuming, from your perspective, was part of laying the foundation of building an audience. Even before you knew exactly how some of these products, you didn't have a plan. You didn't know that Basecamp was going to be this baby that was going to take off, but you were still laying a philosophical foundation to build an audience.
Yeah, I think, it comes down to what's your point of view, and are you willing to be public about it and share it? I think in business, a lot of companies are afraid to be themselves and afraid to say what they believe. And because of that, customers have a hard time understanding the difference between one company and another. I've always believed that companies should have points of view and they should be vocal about them, because I want to know where they stand. I want to know who I'm buying from. I want to know who I'm investing in as a customer. And so we've always just had a strong point of view, and we've never been afraid of sharing it. So the original 37 Signals manifesto site was 37 ideas and points of view about how we saw the industry, how we saw our work, what we thought was important about design and whatever. Rather than showing our work, which is what everyone else was doing, we were showing our ideas, which is what no one else was doing. And by doing that, we certainly upset some people. some people didn't understand what we were doing. They're like, how can you have a web design business and not show work? And the answer was, we'll show you our work after we show you our ideas. And if you like our ideas, then let's talk and I'll show you our work. But if you don't like our point of view and where we're coming from, there's no point in me showing you our work because we're not going to get along. So that was the idea. As far as building the audience, I mean, it was just, I think when you have something to say, especially when it's something that's non-conventional at some level, especially these days, the audience will find you. But it takes a lot of time to build an audience, and it takes commitment because there's a lot of lonely days where no one's looking. You have to be, I think, committed to continue to publish and continue to share, and eventually I think the audience will find you.
You know, I still remember back in the day when I was looking for a web designer, probably in 99 or 2000, and I started to search for usability because I just realized there was something wrong with all the designers that I was dealing with. And there was one lonely operation in Chicago that I could find on a search under the phrase of usability. One operation was taking that term. So
it wasn't really something people talked about that much back then. And I think the main reason why is because back then, a lot of the web design firms were like graphic design or advertising agencies that were beginning to get into web design. And the advertising agencies and design agencies never really thought about usability before because that wasn't their business. For me, coming from a different point of view, which was I made software first, I understood what usability was and why it mattered. And so I wasn't repurposing one business into another. I was just becoming this new business based on, understanding what's required when designing something. It's about being clear and usable and accessible and those things. And so it made sense to me. It wasn't a buzzwordy thing. I don't even think people are using the word that often. It just was like, I want this to be usable. I want to be able to use this thing. This isn't about something I'm just looking at. It's about something I'm using. So it's got to be usable.
It was definitely not a buzzword thing that you guys were doing, but it was how I initially started to learn about your world. Let me jump around on you a little bit more here. So the real world, it's even back to the MTV title, the real world, the real world. I mean, the real world is what you make of it. And I think sometimes I see these constraints out there that people have. I can't do this. I can't do that. I look at your world in particular and I say, wow, there are MBA programs out there. And I unfortunately spent 2 years in an MBA program when I should have been learning software. But there are MBA programs out there that are probably talking about your business as a case study. And what's so interesting about that is that I don't think that's where you developed. That's not how you came along. And it's interesting that I think sometimes we get this backwards on if you're inspired by a Jason and you're inspired by Basecamp, maybe you're not trying to duplicate or emulate them, but if you're inspired, I don't know how that inspiration really, how does it continue and how does it grow inside an MBA program? It seems like you're almost a tinkerer, you're a scientist, you're playing around with things, you're experimenting, you're trying, you're guessing, you're not planning. How do you get that in an MBA program? I don't know, and I've got an MBA.
Well, MBA programs are, I've spoken at a handful of business schools to MBA students. What I've come to realize is that MBA programs aren't for people who want to start their own business for the most part. MBA programs prepare you to go work in an existing business or be a management consultant or something like that, or jump in at a really big company, because almost all of the concepts taught in MBA programs are not really about being scrappy. It's never about being scrappy. It's never about tinkering. I shouldn't say never, but rarely about tinkering, rarely about being scrappy. It's all about balance sheets and income statements, which don't matter at all on day one when you've just got an idea and you want to make something. Like those things matter eventually, certainly, but that doesn't matter right now. And even like risk management and all these, none of that stuff matters when you just have an idea and you want to make something. It just doesn't matter yet. And I think those programs are valuable if your interest is like going to work at Accenture or going to work at a management consulting firm or becoming a CFO or a COO somewhere in some other place and working your way up the chain and understanding corporate America and that stuff. I'm not suggesting that there's nothing valuable at all taught in MBA programs. That's not true. There's lots of valuable things, but they're not applicable to being scrappy and running something out of your house and trying to get your first customer. That's the kind of stuff you need to know how to do, and that's not stuff that's really taught in schools.
Yeah, because it's kind of inverted. We all look to something like Steve Jobs and Wozniak in a garage, and we all kind of know they started in a garage, and then somehow or another it gets flipped that the vast majority of students think, well, forget the garage. Let's go get to the MBA program. And I'm not trying to be super critical of it either. I'm just pointing out that, from an entrepreneurial, being scrappy standpoint, inventing, creating, it just, some of those voices don't necessarily help.
Right. I think they can throw you off. I mean, I've run into a whole bunch of entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs, people who haven't, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean, people who are in school and they want to start a business when they leave school. And the first thing they start thinking about is what they've been taught in business school, which is, I need to go raise money. I need to build up a team. I need to hire a CFO and hire all these C-level executive type people when, man, it's just you. You don't need you can't be a chief executive of anything when there's no one else. You don't need all these levels of hierarchy. You don't need this traditional business stuff. People are obsessed with, I need which corporate structure should I get into, and what's the difference between S corp and a C corp and an LLC? And I go, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter right now. Just make something. Just make something. And even if you have to first start out by having a checking account in your own name and not a business name, that's fine. Just do that to start. Just sell something. Sell your first thing to someone. And then make something and sell to someone. And once you have your first customer and your second customer and your third customer, eventually you can worry about all the legal little details and all the other things that you might need to deal with. But right now, none of that stuff matters until you have something you can sell and that you actually have sold something. I know that's always been my point of view. I remember when I first started doing web design, I think I got my first client and I didn't have a business name. And the guy's like, who do I make the check out to? I'm like, just make it out to me. I don't know. It was $600, my first web design job. Just make it out to me. In fact, you might even know the guy, Tim Knight, who
yes, it was
ran Profit Data.
Yeah. Really, that was your first client? Seriously?
Yeah, he's my first client. So
wow.
I pitched him on something. He hired me, and the first little web design gig was $600. And he's like, how do I pay you? I'm like, I don't know, just write me a check. And I got this check. And I'm like, great. And I was in business. But I didn't have to worry about, was I an S Corp or a C Corp and who, all this stuff and all, do I need a board and all that? I didn't need any of those things. I just needed to sell something. And I could worry about all that other stuff later. But if you go through a traditional business school education, you would never think that way because you've been indoctrinated to think that you need all this structure and all this formality. Business doesn't have to be that way, especially at the start. Eventually, yeah, you got to get your stuff in order or whatever, but that just doesn't matter on day one.
Let me shift a little bit on you. So the idea of people out there listening and they've got some thought in their head, they want to create something, but they're stumbling, they're bumbling, they're not making progress. And I've seen you say, focus on what will not change.
Yeah, this is advice I got from Jeff Bezos, actually. So Jeff Bezos, actually, he's the only person who's ever invested in 37 Signals from the outsides, or Basecamp. In 2006, we sold a really small piece of the company to him. And I can go into the details on why later. But anyway, so Jeff told me, Jeff's given us a lot of advice, and one of the things he told me is, everyone else is focused on the next thing, the next hot thing, the next moving target. He goes, you got to figure out the things in your business that are not going to change and continually invest in those because those investments will pay off in the near term and the long term, and they'll keep paying off. So for the example he gave me was, take Amazon. People are not going to wake up 10 years from now and wish Amazon had a worse selection. They don't want that now, and they're not going to want that in 10 years from now. So we should invest in a very broad selection of products. People are not going to wake up 10 years from now and go, I wish Amazon's delivery was slower. They don't want that today, and they're not going to want that in 10 years. So how can we continue to invest in, in his case, it'd be more distribution centers, faster shipping, better shipping deals, Amazon Prime, all that stuff. How can we get people things faster? That's going to benefit them today and forever, right? And so in our business, what are the things that people aren't going to want or aren't going to wake up 10 years from now and wishing we didn't have? So for example, people aren't going to wake up in 10 years and say, I wish Basecamp was a lot slower. So we invest, and no one wants that today, and they're not going to want it in 10 years. So we invest heavily in infrastructure improvements to make sure that we're cutting milliseconds of time off everywhere we possibly can. So the Basecamp experience is as fast as possible today and tomorrow. People aren't going to wake up in 10 years and go, I wish Basecamp was harder to use. Like, no one's going to say that now, and they're not going to say it in 10 years. So we're focused again back on simplicity and clarity and just nailing the basics and that kind of stuff. And I think that's just such great advice. It doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to other things as well, but you got to get the fundamentals and the basics right. It's something that a lot of companies ignore, and I think they pay for it down the road.
I've seen you say that Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is your favorite book. I have it on my shelf. I've not yet read it. Okay, I've read several Alan Watts books recently, but I must, even without having not read that book, I know it's one of Phil Jackson's favorite books.
I've forgotten why I like that, to be honest. It's been so long.
Well, the word Zen is in it, so let's start there. Okay, so clearly the moment of right now, if I was to ask you, what are you planning to do 5 years from now or 10 years from now? I think you might answer the question if you've got like some wide distribution CNBC reporter. You might answer the question, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking, why did you just ask me what I'm going to be doing 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Because I don't know, because I'm in the moment of right now. Am I completely off base?
No, that's right. I don't know, and I don't care. Right. Because whatever I say, I'm going to be wrong. What am I going to be doing in 10 years? I have no idea. And I promise myself, I promise you and your listeners and everyone else that pretty much anyone who says that, like, if anyone sits there and actually takes stock of things and go, what am I going to be doing in 10 years? And they look back on their answer in 10 years, they're probably going to be wrong almost every single time. If I would have done that at every step of the way, I would have been wrong every time. I didn't know when I launched AudioFile way back in the early 90s, I didn't know I'd be doing web design in 5 years because the web didn't even exist. And then when the web came around, I didn't know I'd be doing Basecamp in 7 years because like web-based software didn't really exist and software as a service didn't really exist. I didn't know. And then we built a bunch of other products. And then I didn't know one day that I'd go back and just do Basecamp, just focus again on Basecamp. I didn't know we'd have 45 people in the company. I thought we'd always be a 20-person company. When we were 10, I thought we'd never be 20. Like, I don't know. Who knows? So I don't worry about things like that because it doesn't matter. I'm trying to stay as focused as I can on the moment. And, I have to look ahead a little bit, and that's, you should. I mean, I'm not totally a day-to-day person, but I'm not worried about what things are going to look like in 5 years because I just don't know. And I don't think anyone knows. I mean, especially in this industry where things are moving so quickly, you just don't really know. So, and I think it's okay to wait and see. Some companies will lose because they wait and see, certainly, and that we could be one of them. But I think if you just keep trying to predict the future and stuff, it's just such a moving target. It's not even worth doing. I think you got to pay attention to right now for the most part, and that's what you can control. Every day out from now is harder and harder to control, and to a certain point where you get far enough out, you have no control unless you're one of the very, very, very few people and companies who truly are redrawing the future. There's really, a handful of them in the world out of a zillion companies that exist. So it's pretty rare that you're going to be one of those. And if you're not, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
I have one last question for you, but I thought before I asked that, you brought it up, and I don't know if you want to elaborate, if the audience would find it interesting, if it's an interesting story. You mentioned Jeff Bezos, and I didn't know if there was some background or color there that is inspirational for other people. I don't know if you want to elaborate or.
So we launched Basecamp, the product, in 2004, and it had been doing pretty well. And 2006 came around. In the first couple of years, we've been approached by a variety of venture capital firms. And I've always been someone who said, I don't want external money because first of all, we didn't need it. Our customers were paying for things. They were generating more revenue than we needed, so we had nice profits and everything was great. And I didn't want it. I don't want to be on someone else's time frame, which is typically what happens when someone invests from the outside. They want you to sell or IPO or something because they want their money back, which makes sense. And I just didn't want it. But then one day, someone from Jeff's office called us, and I admire Jeff hugely. I think he's one of the smartest entrepreneurs in the world, maybe the top CEO in the world today. Anyway, fascinating guy, and to get to meet him was sort of an amazing moment. So I said, sure, I'll fly out to Seattle and meet with Jeff about this. Jeff had heard about us because I think a couple of the companies he'd invested in had used Basecamp. We also designed a website for a company that he'd invested in. So I think there's some triangulation. I think he heard me speak somewhere at a conference. And it just sort of all these things came together and he wanted to meet us. So I flew out to Seattle, fully not intending to take money from him at all. But we had a really great conversation, and I really, really liked him, and I felt like we could really benefit a lot from him. Most of the VCs and investors who hit us up weren't business people. They're business people, but they weren't entrepreneurs. They hadn't started a business. They're not running a business currently other than their investment firm. And Jeff was a CEO, alive and well, running a business, building a business, started from scratch just a few years before that. He'd gone through the things that we thought we were going to be going through. And so through a variety of, we negotiated and stuff here and there. And ultimately in 2006, we decided to sell a small piece of the company to him. Now, these were founder shares, basically, which meant that it was not an investment in the company. He didn't put money into our company. What he did was he bought a piece of the company from me and David, my business partner. So it was money off the table for David and I. So we could take a little bit of risk off the table early on because we had no idea if this thing was going to work. It worked for 2 years, but could it go away in 3 years and 2 years? Absolutely. So let's take a little bit of risk off the table, have a little bit of comfort, a little bit of a buffer, and then we can just get back to focusing on the product again so we don't have to struggle through it all. It's been great. I mean, we talk to Jeff maybe once or twice a year, or his people. We don't talk to him very often. He's available to us if we have really important questions that we need to ask him, and occasionally we do. But for the most part, he's given us some early advice. He's there. He's an ear if we need his. He'll give us opinions and points of view if we ask. But part of the deal was he doesn't have a controlling stake in the company. We don't have a board of directors, so he's not on the board of directors. It was not a typical investment where an investor comes in and they have all this control over you and they can force you to do this and force you to do that. That's not how the deal went, because that's not what we wanted, and that's not what he wanted either. He's got a million other things going on in his world that we're pennies for him ultimately. So
it's almost like he saw something that you might not have seen, and it was almost like he wanted to inspire you, it sounds like.
Yeah, he does this occasionally, I think, where he finds companies he likes. He likes their point of view. He likes that they're doing something differently. They're a little radical or whatever. And I think he likes to support those kind of companies. So in many ways, it was support, but he's also a very astute investor, and he's not just giving away money. So, we're an LLC structurally, so we pay off dividends every year to the owners of the company, and he's a partial owner. So he gets money every year as long as we're profitable, and we have been profitable ever since we've been in business. So he's actually getting his money back all the time. So it was a smart investment for him, very smart investment financially. And also it wasn't an investment that takes any of his time. So I think it was a real win for him too, and we feel good about it as well.
So this is kind of for the audience out there, those people out there that are sitting back, they've got ideas, but they're not executing ideas. And I've seen you talk about the notion of planning versus guessing, and planning doesn't really do much. Guessing is where we're at. But even bigger picture than that, I've seen you talk about winging it. You're talking to a guy who's done a lot of winging, okay? So I'm right there with you at the winging. And I live for the winging. But talk about winging it, because winging it is, gosh, if there's ever a secret sauce when you think you don't have anything, winging it is part of that sauce.
I feel like it's okay to have no idea what the hell you're doing. And I feel like the truth is most people don't have any idea what they're doing. I think it's easy to look in, especially as an entrepreneur or a wannabe entrepreneur, someone who hasn't started something yet, and look at all these businesses and look at all these role models and think that these people have it all figured out, that they are all so smart, they've got it all figured out, they've sit there and toiled and labored over all these individual decisions, and they plan it all out, and it's working just as they thought. I think the truth is that very few people have any idea what they're doing, that we're all figuring this stuff out as we go, and that's entirely okay, and the people should understand that as someone who's never started a business, you're not that far off from someone who has. It's very hard to replicate this success, and sometimes it's about timing, and sometimes it's about making one right decision here and there, and sometimes it's luck, and sometimes it's a mistake that works, and you just don't know, and it's totally fine just to figure things out as you go. You do not have to have this stuff figured out. I feel like a lot of people are afraid to start because they feel like they don't know what step 2 would be, or they don't know what the next deal would be, and so you figure out as you go, and it's fine. It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. That's the advice I always give people. And I feel like there's just a lot of fear built up and risk built up around businesses. And I understand where that comes from, but I just don't feel like it has to be this terrifying thing where you feel like you've got to have it all figured out, or you're not a good business person, or you're not a good leader, or you're not going to build something successful. I don't know, just make something great and treat people well and get the word out about it and do it right and have good morals and be someone of integrity, and like things are going to be okay, I think, for the most part. It doesn't mean it's always going to work. There's many things that don't work, but just figure it out as you go and you'll be fine.
The books, Rework, Remote, Getting Real. Jason, everybody can find you at basecamp.com. Is there anything else I'm leaving out?
No, you can also find me on Twitter, Jason Fried, Fried. That's just one word on Twitter. You can get me there. Yeah, that's it. It's fun. I want people to do well, and I just want people to realize they don't have to drive themselves completely crazy trying to run a business.
I think what people loved about Rework, and I know for me, is it was the things that I was living, but I was not astute enough to write down. So I was going through those experiences, and I'm sure that's why the book has been such a bestseller, is that so many people lived it, but they couldn't enunciate it. They couldn't write it down. Then when they saw your words, like, oh, damn, that's what I believe. That's what I've been doing.
Right. That's the funny thing about, so we hear from people who've read Rework all the time, and they email us, because at the end of the book, we have our email address in there. And one of the things we realize, or we hear from, the type of person we hear from a lot, is someone who is so thankful that they're not alone, that they read the book and they're like, yes, this is what I've always felt, but I thought I was crazy because everyone told me you can't do it this way. And I had been on this island thinking I've been doing it wrong this whole time. And oh my God, I realized that now I had not been doing it wrong. That in fact, you can make things up as you go, and you can be scrappy, and you can not have any clue about things, and you can not have to be incredibly formal. Like I've been doing it this way. I didn't know it was okay. And now I feel great about it because I know it's okay. So we hear from so many of those people, and it's really great to hear from them, because I've often felt the same way. Like when I explain like how we run our business to other people, some people think I'm nuts. And like at a certain point, when enough people tell you you're nuts, you're thinking to yourself, maybe I am. Like, am I nuts? Really? But really, I'm not. I'm just trying to do something basic. And
yeah, but even if you were nuts, it's more fun being a little nuts than just not nuts, right? So
that's true too. That's true too. So maybe everyone who does things this way is nuts, but at least it feels good to know there are other people who are nuts too.
Indeed,
and that feels great. So
hey, listen, thank you for taking the time today, and hopefully we can talk again in the future.
That'd be fun, man. Thanks again. Good to hear from you again.
Take care. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.